Hey everybody, welcome back. This week's exercise we're going to be working on hollow metal door frames. Hollow metal door frames come in two different types. They come welded, as in one piece, where the jambs and the header are welded together and they get bolted to the floor. Or they come in a three-piece assembly where you have to build it progressively after the drywall gets installed. Today's exercise we're going to be using three-piece hollow metal frames, and I'm going to show you guys how to install those, and we'll get started by doing a little bit of framing. Okay, so the very first step in proceeding with installing our framing is going to be the layout and position of our door. So I'm going to walk you guys through this. Now, the layout of our wall, I'm going to ask that everybody chooses a 2x4 stud inside one of their cubbies, because by now everybody should have drywall on two sides of their little unit, which means that we can anchor the stud to the drywall on one side at any location, but on the opposite side where the 2x4 is and there is no drywall, just to save on material and not consume some extra steel using ladder blocking in between our studs, let's just choose one stud and then pick that point for our layout and keep everything parallel off our back wall. So in this particular unit here, to the center of this stud, I've got 47 5/8. So I'm going to put a little mark there. For this exercise, we're going to be using 2.5-inch steel stud and track. So the center of my 2x4, as I mentioned, was 47 5/8. And I'll repeat, we're going to be using 2.5-inch steel material. So splitting that 2.5, we're going to have 1.25 on each side of that center mark. 1.25 to my left, 1.25 to my right, for a total of 2.5. Now I'm going to re-measure the outside of the framing line, and it reads 48 3/4. These measurements may not be specific to your hut that you're going to be working in, but just keep in mind that the center of the wall should line up with one of your 2x4 so that we can avoid wasting material for the ladder blocking. So triple check. 48 7/8. I'm going to do the same on this side. 48 7/8. I'm actually going to measure this piece here, and I've got 6 foot 1/2 inch. So, to measure my 2.5-inch track, 6 foot 1/2 inch, and I'm going to cut. Okay. Since my level was too long to give me a straight edge, I just cut one piece of base track. I say base track, but what I mean is I cut one piece of track that I'm going to use as a straight edge, because I need a full continuous piece of track for the top anyway. So I'm going to line it up on my mark on both ends, and I'm just going to draw a nice straight line, or I could use my chalk line. This is another way to do it, across the floor. Just like so. And I'm going to put an X on the side where I have to screw my track to. Very important. Now that I have a straight line, it's time to lay out our door. Okay, so we're going to lay out our door. I have a dimension here, as mentioned earlier, 72.5. I'm going to bring you guys in because everybody adds and multiplies fractions differently. I'm going to show you guys the way I do it. 72.5. Okay? First I'm going to split the 70. 35. Then I'm going to split the 2. 1 inch. Then I'm going to split the half. So, lining up your columns is very important. And at that point, it's just easy math. So you have 36 and a quarter. This is the way I like to divide my fractions. It helps me do it rather quickly, and I can see what I'm doing, and it's easier to pick out errors because then you just work it backwards. So, on with our layout. I've applied the marks onto the floor. Now I'm going to reposition the camera and we're going to start framing. Okay, now that the base track is in, I'm going to screw it to the floor, install my wall studs, making sure that they are level and plumb, and then we'll put the top track on and infill the studs for the door. Make sure that bubble is perfectly centered in between those lines. If it's not, your door's going to open all by itself or close all by itself because it won't be sitting plumb. The piece of base track that I used to create a straight line on the floor, I didn't cut it. I'm saving it for the top track. So if I didn't say it earlier, I'm saying it now. Everyone's going to get 1.5 pieces of track, no more. One's going to be used for your top track and the pieces of the base. The half piece of track will be used for your header. So if you have to write that down to remember, please go ahead and do so. I'm going to grab a ladder and we're going to install the top track. I'm going to open up this track just a little bit so it slides nicely on top. That's all there is to it. Now that it's up, my hands are free. Reposition my ladder so that I can safely install some screws. We're going to install our jamb studs. So it's always good practice to install 2 studs on each side of the door for multiple reasons. It gives the wall the strength that it needs, and it's good nailing surface for your casing. I'm going to start by screwing the bottoms flush to the opening to maintain our 32-inch rough opening. Then I'm going to use my level. I'm going to level one side. I'm going to move it until that bubble is centered in between those 2 lines. it's centered between the two lines, you're going to get your marker. You're going to put a mark at the top with an X on the right side of the opening. Bring over my ladder and safely install some screws. Both studs, front and back. Okay. Now that I have one side completely screwed, top and bottom, front and back, I still need to level this side. We can do it two ways. We put the level back on it, make sure that our bubble is centered between the lines, and it should be fine. Another way we can do it is, knowing that we've leveled this, and we need to have a 32-inch opening, well, if we've leveled this side, and we have 32 on the bottom, and we measure 32 on the top, this should end up being level. That's what I'm going to do. Hold my tape, make sure that I've got 32 inches. When I see that I've got 32, I make a mark at the top with my marker, put an X on the left side of the opening where the stud needs to go. Double check to make sure it's level. Of course it's level. Okay. Now we're going to install the header. We said that our header height was going to be 1.25 inches above the door height. This is an 80-inch door, so we're going to add 1.25 inches to that. Instead of making the mark over here, make it on the side. It'll make sense when we install our header. Now that I've got my header height, I'm going to just put an X up here to remind me that the steel track needs to be above that line and certainly not below. Now it's time to cut our header. Some of you may remember from last semester when we were working on our steel exercise, we had to do some lips, some ears, and some shoes. And that's just the field terminology for the way you cut and bend the metal so that it can be placed up against another piece of metal and sort of hug and be snug in place. So for headers with steel studs and track, we use what's called a shoe to grab onto each side of the stud. So how long does the shoe need to be? It needs to be 3 inches long. That's the minimum. You can go more, but you should not go less. So I'm going to start by measuring and putting a mark at 3 inches. 3 inches, it's easy to add on to and divide by. It's a whole number. So let's just reflect back onto our rough opening size. Our rough opening size is 32 inches. Okay. We've started with a 3-inch shoe. I'm going to keep my tape on the end of the track, okay, and keep traveling down. Even though my 3-inch mark is there, we're going to leave it, and we're going to keep traveling down. Our rough opening is 32, but we're going to add 3 because we've added a 3-inch shoe. So 1, 2, 3. And then we need to add a 3-inch shoe for this side. 1, 2, 3. With your speed square, we're going to square these marks. All 3 of them. The 3-inch shoe here on this side. Our 32-inch track for the header. And our 3-inch shoe on this side. So, we have a 3-inch shoe on one side, and then we have a mark, a 32-inch rough opening, another mark, and a 3-inch shoe. This is where we're going to cut the steel completely. This is what we're left with. 3-inch shoe, 32-inch rough opening for the steel, and another 3-inch shoe. On these lines, we're going to snip the front, snip the back, just until we see the tip of our snips poking through. We're going to line that up with our mark and snip. Spin the piece around, and we're going to repeat. Snip the front, we snip the back until we... Now, again, you don't have to walk around the stud. You just place your snips there, and when you see the tip of your snips peeking out through the back, we line it up because we want to finish the bite of our snips at the back of the track on the line. Can everybody see that? Okay. So what makes this a shoe is now we're going to bend and keep it at a roughly 90 degrees. Roll it around. We're going to bend and do the same thing. This, ladies and gentlemen, is a steel track header. Okay, so let's take this back to our wall and install it. I've got my header and those 2 marks that we made earlier. So we're going to use this as a shoe because that's going to get sucked onto the stud. So shoe, slide this up. So this is where the marks being on this side of the stud become important. If they were inside here, you wouldn't see them. So we're going to line up these marks with this cut because that's going to be where the bottom of this track is going to be. So we line this up. And we line this up. I don't recommend putting screws here for 2 reasons. It tends to bulge out the drywall, and if ever you need to retrofit this header size for a larger door down the road, you won't be able to access the screws here. But because it's a 3-piece frame and we can install it and remove it after the drywall, having the screws here make the most sense. For the purposes of this exercise and to minimize waste, I'm going to suggest that everybody installs only 1 cripple stud above the header. Typically we would be doing 2 or 3 following a 16-inch spacing, but for the purposes of this exercise and to be good on the environment and reduce waste, we're going to use only 1 stud in the center. So, 14 and 5/8. 32-inch rough opening. That means my center would be at 16 inches. 16, 16, and I'm going to put that at the center of my stud. When you get to this point, we're going to be ready for drywall. Please go and see the technician in the lab and ask him for the drywall screw gun, and he'll get it for you so we can start installing the drywall. So, believe it or not, there is a better way to install drywall around a door frame. I'm going to use this piece as an example. This was just a piece of waste. So we can install this two ways. With our strip surpassing the door and our strip meeting it this way. The problem with doing it this way is that now we have a tapeable seam or a taper's joint in line with the door where it's going to be swung and closed, opened and closed and slammed potentially multiple times each day, which is going to weaken this. So rule of thumb in the field is that when you're installing drywall, you typically try your best to never have a vertical joint on the jamb of a door frame on either side. So I'm going to ask that everybody installs it overhanging like this. Okay, it's always better to have the joint this way than vertically. Okay? Everyone's going to be installing a 6-inch band of drywall on the front and on the back, both sides. All the way across the top, all the way around the sides. Okay? Everybody try and do your best to do a nice clean job. I'll get started with the drywall. One thing I will point out is if anybody gets a 6-inch piece of drywall with the factory bevel on it, it is not good practice to have the bevel on the inside of the opening. So please, if you guys have a bevel on your strip of drywall, make it face on the outside of your strip or facing the top. So no bevel inside the frame. Bevel facing the outside. Now that I got my drywall tacked up, I'm going to finish screwing it on. And that's what we're dealing with. Drywall screwed on both sides of my rough opening. Now we can talk about installing our hollow metal frame. Okay, hopefully everybody can see me down there. Now, here's our hollow metal frame. So let's talk about this assembly right here. We have 2.5 inch stud, 1/2 inch drywall, 1/2 inch drywall, for a complete thickness of 3.5. That 3.5 complete thickness is, when we're talking about the door frame, we're talking about the throat. That's the distance between the inside and the inside of the door frame. Now these frames are ordered specifically for this wall type. If this wall type was constructed out of 3 5/8 stud with 5/8 drywall on either side, well, the throat thickness would be 4 7/8. So we'd have to order frames specific to that size. What we're going to do now is we're going to install our jambs and our header over top of the drywall and steel stud assembly. So this happens by sliding it over top, and it should fit perfectly over the installed assembly. Now I'm hanging onto the header piece, so don't let go, but I just wanted to show you, for example, how nice and snug it slides over the drywall. I'm going to take this down. So the method we use when we install this is we install one side first, which would be one jamb. We install the header next, and then we install the remaining jamb. So I'll go get the pieces and we'll do that together. Okay, hopefully my head's not cut off. Let's see. So this is the jamb on the hinge side. It's got hinges. The throat thickness is going to be the same. And it has these little setting clips inside. So we're going to talk about these after. But first, we're going to install our frame complete. And then we're going to level it by using these clips that expand. And we tighten this screw. So this is the top of the frame. One other thing I want to mention about the top of the frame is these little tabs. These little tabs, when it's inside the wall, when it's installed in the wall, they get inserted into these holes of the header. So I'm going to install it. You guys just watch and see how this is done. I will add that on the bottom of the frame, there's going to be these flat clips. These need to be opened up because these get screwed through the drywall and into the track. Through the drywall into the track, okay? So if they're sitting too tight, it's a problem. So you have to open them up a little bit past the frame so that they can hug the drywall. I'm going to show you what this looks like upside down. Just so, because right now we're working on the header, and I'll show you what this looks like and how this is supposed to be installed just on the bottom. Okay? And then these clips get screwed through the drywall into the track. These tabs here are very delicate, and the final step to locking in this frame, I'm going to explain how to do it, but we're not going to do it because if we bend and ruin these tabs, this 3-piece frame will no longer function properly. So, starting from the bottom, we install our frame starting from the bottom. You have to make sure that this tab is on the outside of the drywall, just like this. And then with a little bit of up and down motion, you wiggle it until it's fully inserted into the wall. Can everybody see that? Fully with the wall completely buried inside the frame. That's why it's called a hollow frame, because there's nothing in it yet. We're going to put a wall in there. And then holding the bottom with my foot, you can kind of just press your foot there, and then you slowly walk the frame in, making sure that at the top the drywall sits inside. Okay, so as we close the gap, I'm going to open it a bit to show you. We're going to close the gap so that our frame is pushed all the way to the back. And that's what it looks like installed. We have our fastening clips on the outside ready for later use. And the wall is fully inserted into the hollow metal frame. Okay? So, next step is the header. It's important to make sure that you have your door side matched up with the door side of the jamb. One side is always going to be thicker than the other. One to accommodate the door thickness, and the other one just to be the other side of the door frame. So, line it up like this. If we're not happy with it, we turn it around, make sure it's the right way. Now I'm going to install the frame over the drywall. Now I'm going to try and do this together with you guys. These holes need to be occupied with those pieces of metal. I'm going to move this camera and try to give everybody the best possible angle for this, because a lot needs to happen with this install, all at the same time. Inserting the header on top of the drywall, making sure that these line up and they're not backwards. You guys can't see behind me, but behind me I'm lifting up the frame into the drywall, and these tabs here need to go inside those holes. So we need to do a little bit of manipulating with this frame, left and right. And we can slowly start to get this frame pressed down. So, this side went down. This side also went down. So there you have it. This is what it's going to look like. As long as you've got your two tabs inside the header and these two tabs poking through the holes at the top, you have done it properly. Everything is going great at this point. Now we're going to move on to installing the other jamb that's left to install. So here we are. This is where we're at. If you are at this point, you are on track. So once we get to this point here, where we have our header installed with our hinge side, what we're going to want to do is, with the strike side, open up our tabs at the bottom so that it can hug the outside of the drywall. And we're going to carefully align these tabs into the top of the header. But unlike this side where we installed the bottom first, on the last piece, we're going to install the top first. Because if we try to install the bottom first, it's going to hit into the frame. So for the last jamb, we go top first, line up our hole, and we slowly press it into the bottom. And then we want to keep an eye on these tabs, making sure that they line up with our header. We're going to start to pull the header down. And if we notice that we're having a hard time, it's probably because this clip here and this clip here, they're too far in. So what we need to do, pull it out and spread these open just a little. And then we'll try that again. Okay, bring our header down slowly. Watch your fingers, it may pinch. And there it is, it's in. So, make sure the frame is back down behind you. Okay. Once you're at this point, you're in good shape. I'm going to show you what the bottom looks like. At this point, the bottom is not in yet. But we have our jamb into the header on both sides. So when we get to the bottom, what we need to do is carefully bring it into the wall. And be mindful of the tabs. This is where you want to make sure that these land outside the drywall and not inside. And when I say outside, you have to do it on both sides, the front and the back of the wall. So, once they're in there, now don't keep your fingers here. Don't keep your fingers here and shove the frame in. So work it slowly, left and right, until it's in. Once it's in, your frame is fully installed. And that's what it looks like. So when you get to this point, everything's going really well. We move on to the next step. The next step is going to be leveling our frame using these two set screws and holding the dimension of our door opening, which happens to be 30 inches in this case. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we're back. So a couple of things need to happen before we screw the bottom of the frame in place. First thing you want to do is level the header. And if your header needs to be leveled, we're not going to lift the header up, we're going to lift the jamb. I'm going to level my header quick. So it looks to me like it's pretty level, so I'm going to leave it the way it is. If it wasn't leveled, I would get some kind of pry bar or glazing bar and jack up this frame just a little bit to compensate and slide underneath some vinyl shims. The reason why I say vinyl is because wood in a commercial setting, if you ever get some water damage, it tends to rot and just sort of disintegrate, and then that frame over time will eventually sag back down. So, we get our level. We're going to level one side. My level is telling me that I got to bring the bottom of the frame towards me. So I'm going to do that, wiggling it 1/8 to 1/4 inch at a time, not more, because it will pull out of the door frame, out of the opening completely. We don't want that. Okay. Come some more. Okay, now that my frame is sitting level, we're going to get some drywall screws, and we're going to put 2 screws in these holes through the drywall into the track. Then with our measuring tape, if we have a 30-inch door, that means we're going to want a 30-inch finished complete opening. Right now I have 30 1/4, so I'm going to bring the bottom of that side over. But before I bring that bottom side over to 30, it's always good practice to check what the manufacturer has already stamped into the metal for a final opening. And at the top I have exactly 30 inches. Sometimes it's 30 1/8, 30 1/16. You always want to try and copy what's at the top and make sure you have it at the bottom. So, since I've fixed this side already, this is where I'm going to put the head of my tape so that I can always read when I get to 30 inches. And I'm going to wiggle it over until I get to 30. Now that I'm at 30, we're going to put 2 screws into the bottom, through the drywall, into the track. Now that I've got 30 inches here, we're going to square our frame. We're going to use our square onto the layout line that we used, and then we're going to reference the door frame to the square on both sides of the wall. Even though we've held 30 inches here, one way to make sure we have 30 also at the back is to take the racking out of the frame. The way we take the racking out is we reference a square line from our layout line. I'm going to choose a happy number of 5. Make sure that I have 5 on this side of the frame. Shows 5 1/16, so I'm going to adjust 5. I've got 5 on this side, 5 on the front, 5 on the back, and I'm going to do the same thing. Put 2 screws into the clip, through the drywall, into the metal track. Now instead of squaring this side, I'm going to use my measuring tape. Make sure that I've got 30 inches again. And I got 30 inches. So I'm going to put in my last 2 screws. Through the drywall, into the frame. Can't stress that enough. That's the way it's got to go. And when you stand back and look, this is what your completed frame should look like. Now I will talk briefly about the clips and how that's supposed to work. These tabs up here, for the purposes of this exercise and reusing the material, I don't want anybody banging them down. In the field, when you're installing this frame, these tabs are supposed to be hammered down so that your frame cannot rise up. So typically in the field, what you would do is you'd get the back of your hammer and hammer that tab and squash it. That prevents that frame from coming up, from coming apart. Now you have these screws that engage the clips behind the frame that we spoke about earlier. So typically what I do is I put my level back on the frame, double checking, making sure that it's level. And it appears to have gone out of level while we were working. So we're gonna get our pencil ready. This one happens to be a mechanical one. No big deal, as long as we got something to write with. And to get the best angle, we're gonna move the camera over so we can see the level and the frame. So, the level is telling me that the frame needs to go this way. So, what I will do in the field is I'll put a pencil line here so that I can see how far the frame moved when I actually move it. I'm going to put my level onto the throat so that I can access that set screw. And I'm going to start cranking the screw until the frame moves over. Okay, I know you guys can see that. So I'm going to keep moving that frame until I read level on the bubble. When I read level on the bubble, what I need to do is do the exact same thing to the opposite side, just until it's snug, so that the frame can't go back anymore this way. Once it's snug, you check for level again, and you can see I had to squeeze over a 1/4 inch on the top. Now we have our level and secured 3-piece knockdown frame. Okay, good luck everybody.